The speakers will speak for between 5 and 15 minutes each, 4 speakers, after which we will go into breakout rooms and think about the pathways that are available to you to work with us. And then the session will be ended by Tabby reading the Akupa translation of the Shambhala Warrior, which is probably familiar and well loved by many people on this call. And my own reception of that particular text is that I cannot read it too often. So I hope that is shared by all of us here. Okay, so 90 minutes maximum is what we're going for. So I'll just talk a bit about Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil is the campaign that has grown out of Insulate Britain, and the demand is really simple. It is that the UK government stops issuing any licenses for further exploration and development of fossil fuels. That's it. And that we will be in civil resistance of various kinds until that demand is met. And I'm just going to read something very short, which is from the Pali Canon. It's credited to Shakyamuni, the Buddha himself. But of course, as with so much in the Pali Canon, we don't know exactly when it was written and who said it. But this is what I would like to say to you about civil resistance, or rather what the Buddha said about how to respond to an extreme crisis, or to anger and hatred, or to any of the things which are deforming our world. If one comes across a person who has been shot by an arrow, one does not spend time wondering about where the arrow came from, or the caste of the individual who shot it, or analysing what type of wood the shaft is made of, or the manner in which the arrowhead was fashioned. Rather, one should focus on pulling out the arrow. And that's what we're choosing to do in Just Stop Oil, because the crisis which the climate emergency is provoking, and which is already causing immense suffering to living beings across the world, is human-made. It's we that have caused it, and it is we who seek to force a conversation, a national conversation, a conversation with government about what needs to happen to get in its way. And what we hope to do is to offer a way of being, a way of civilly resisting what is about to happen, or what is already happening. And that is because the other forms of opposition are past. The other forms of opposition, it's too late for protest. It's too late for sitting in meditation as in civil resistance. It's too late for a variety of things which we all recognise as good things to do, but insufficient things to do. And that's because in about 10 years' time, we will know if what we are set on has worked or not. Because in 10 years' time, a number of, they're called tipping points, climate tipping points will be reached, which will mean that the damage that we are causing is irreversible, and it's almost impossible to predict what will happen at that time. But we do know that many billions of people will be displaced. We do know that extreme weather events will become relatively routine, as they are in some parts of the world already. And we do know that we need to say, this must not happen, as clearly as we can. You have no doubt been aware of the floods in Pakistan, which were caused by glacial melting after weeks and weeks of extreme temperatures. The glacial melting in turn meant that the monsoon rains were much heavier. So a third of the landmass of Pakistan has been submerged in floods. and it's difficult to count the people who have died and who will die because the crops have been wiped out, because people, children particularly, will drown and have drowned, and because waterborne diseases will also kill people. So that's just one area. And before the monsoon rains came, the temperatures meant that birds were dropping from the sky and dying. They simply couldn't sustain themselves in the temperatures which were there. So we're asking you to join us in whatever way you can. And the pathways to action are the first thing that I've got down here, but it's not the first thing in the order of priority, is we're asking people to consider giving 1 hour's income a month regularly to Just Stop Oil. We'll go through all this again at the end. The second thing that we're asking you to do is to consider going to Downing Street at 11 o'clock every day from now on. The first time happened today. It's largely non-arrestable action, so we keep moving, basically, outside Downing Street. The third thing is that you consider joining us in civil resistance, which means joining one of the teams which are occupying Westminster or blocking Westminster through the month of October for as long as we can continue. And the fourth thing is there's an interfaith action on the 14th of October. The people who are the prime movers in that are Christian Climate Action, and we inviting you. They're very pleased to welcome people of all faiths to join them, and that will be an arrestable action, and we can say more about that when we're in the breakout rooms. So that's the end of the introduction, except I'm going to read you another short and inspirational piece from Joanna Macy, who is a Buddhist and an activist for some half a century. And she says, "Out of this darkness, these events that are happening now, a new world can arise, not to be constructed by our minds so much as to emerge out of our dreams. Even though we cannot see clearly how it's going to turn out, we are still called to let the future into our imagination. We will never be able to build what we have first not cherished in our hearts, or we must first cherish in our hearts what we seek to build. The biggest gift you can give is to be absolutely present. And when you're worrying about whether you're hopeful or hopeless, or pessimistic or optimistic, who cares? The main thing is that you're showing up, that you're here, and that you're finding ever more capacity to love this world, because it will not be healed without that." That is what is going to unleash our intelligence, our ingenuity, and our solidarity for the healing of the world. So welcome to this session. And our first speaker is Cameron Ford, who is a Mitra in the Triratna order. And he has been involved with activism for just over a year now, and he went straight in with Insulate Britain and is now with Just Stop Oil. Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you, Di. Yeah, it's really great that so many of you have come this evening. So really, thank you. It really feels good that there's a lot of people who have shown up. I'm really grateful for that. So I was at Buddhafield just over a year ago, a place that was becoming really special to me. I'd been doing site crew for a couple of years, and I was just there as a punter that year. And for me, having been going to the Buddhist Centre in Cambridge for a number of years, Buddhafield just really clicked in a whole nother gear. For me, it was like really seeing the play and joy that comes out of the spiritual life I was really taken by it the first time I went, and it's become a big part of my life now. And so I saw a talk called Insulate Britain on the billboard, and I thought, that's great. I'd love to learn more about how we insulate homes, being a carpenter and having a sort of genuine interest in that. And 3 months later, I found myself glued to the M25. And that's just how things happen sometimes. It was a convincing talk. I learned about the seriousness of the situation we were in. Cittapala was there at that talk, and I did just feel this calling that I couldn't turn away from. I pretty much at the end of the talk knew I had to do it. And it was hugely empowering to have things come into alignment like that. And now, a year on, and we had a lot of hatred in the media, and to hear them talk about us in a kinder way, that we were actually right and we could have had a year's worth of retrofitting homes before this winter, this really hard winter that's now coming for a lot of people in fuel poverty. It's a good feeling, because it is hard what we do, and you do question whether it's the right thing. But I believe it is. So I was quite active with Triratna. I've been going along for about 5 years. I was helping out at the Young Persons Night. I was doing Mitra study. And when I learned of civil resistance and the mode of being in that and what that looks like, I was really surprised that there weren't other people at the Buddhist Center doing that as well. It just kind of, to me, felt like the right thing to do. And I thought Buddhists are full of people doing the right thing. So I did start struggling to go there, because I felt quite alone all of a sudden. And when I moved into civil resistance, because what drew me to the Buddhist Center originally was Sangha. I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I was craving, and that's what kept me there. But then I moved into civil resistance, and I found Sangha. In that, I found people that I would trust with my life. I came across people who were giving up so much, renouncing their freedoms by going to prison, giving up their jobs to help alleviate the suffering of all beings, donating time and money to the campaign. And luckily I was with a dear friend from Cambridge, Priya Darker, and we were doing Insulate Britain together, and we would meditate before going out into those challenging scenarios of confronting the public to try and cause a national conversation about something we felt needed to be spoken about. Sometimes we would meditate for a little bit too long, and you got like 12 people meditating by the M25, and I think it was getting a bit obvious who we were. But, you know, we kept it in check enough that we could get out there in time. And so all these things I'm describing, they're the same thing that could be said about people in the Sangha, all the things that people give up, the commitment people make. And so my case is that I think we have more in common with the spiritual life and being in civil resistance than we believe. For me, I see them as the same. They are, but I believe that it's love in action. And so I would like to see Buddhists be activists and activists be Buddhists, and for us to blur this line of separation. And that's why I'm here, and that's my journey of what it is for me to be a Buddhist in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you so much. Okay, and I'm now going to take us to Paramananda, who is an order member in the Triratna order, and he's a poet and an author, and he's written 4 books on meditation, and these are Change Your Mind, A Deep Beauty, The Body, and The Myth of Meditation. And I think apart from that last one, change your mind, a deeper beauty, and the body, we're really touching on all what I hope both Paramananda and Cittapala are going to touch on when they speak with us. So I'll just hand over to Paramananda, and I'll just say that when he's nearing the end of his allotted 15 minutes, I'm going to sound a gong, and that will enable Paramananda to know that he's wrapping up. Thanks.
Thank you. I felt strangely, I do a lot of teaching, but I felt strangely nervous about this evening, and I was wondering why. And I think it's because for a long time now in my own practice, my own life, I felt this increasing pressure, this increasing grief about the world. And I'm kind of aware when we really open to this stuff, it's very difficult for us to hold as individuals. And Sangha, therefore, is hugely important, whether it's a Sangha of Buddhists or the Sangha of activists. Community is so important for us to be able to open our hearts to what's really happening and be able to act without being overwhelmed. And of course, Buddhism and meditation has a lot to offer. Anyway, I wanted to, when I thought about what I wanted to say, my mind went back to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories we have in the world, at least 2,000 years BC. It's a cycle of myths, which includes the descent of the Ya'ana down into the underworld. But the main myth is about the hero Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a semi-divine leader of the first city, and well, it's a long, complicated story, but central to this story is when Gilgamesh and his half-brother Enkidu go to the forest of Lebanon to cut down the cedars, the great cedar trees in the forest of Lebanon. And in order to do this, they have to confront and actually slay the guardian of the forest, Hombaba. So they kill him and they cut down these trees and they take them back to the city to build the temple gate. And the gods are very, well, some of the gods at least are very upset with them. And it has very dire consequences because of the hubris of both killing the guardian of the forest and destroying the forest. And this is the oldest story we still have in the world. So what's going on now has been going on for a very long time. The course is intensified and accelerated in recent years. So it's been going on a very long time. The other thing that came to my mind was the Buddha's enlightenment. And this story, of course, when the Buddha takes this place at the Absolute Monde, the center of the world, under the Bodhi tree, I'm sure you're all familiar with this story, he's confronted with Mara, the so-called evil one, that sends his armies against him. His reaction, of course, is just to meet them with unconditional love. And anyway, towards the end of this encounter with Mara, Mara gives up trying to attack him because it's not working and enters into this conversation with him, this debate with him about his right to sit under the Bodhi tree. And of course, he makes this famous gesture, doesn't he, of touching the earth. And when he touches the earth god, the goddess, or many thousands of earth goddesses, rise up from the earth and show their top half. And they bear witness to his right to sit under the Bodhi tree, the axis of the universe. And I just found this image so interesting that the Buddha caused the earth to witness his enlightenment. You know? The Buddha caused the earth to do that. And I wondered, if we called the earth now, what would the earth have to say to us? You know? What would the earth have to say to us? Would it witness our enlightenment, our hearts opening? One of the things that I'm most interested in, actually, of course, I'm interested in environmental degradation, which is just unbelievable. But I'm interested in what harm that does to our psyche, you know? How that stops us opening, actually. This is, to echo the wonderful Joanne Macy, you know, and all the work she's done over so many years. But actually, what we're all carrying this terrible burden of grief now. And the only way is to move through it into compassionate action which is based in love. I think as a Buddhist, as already been mentioned in the introduction, it is no longer enough for us to just sit on our cushions. It's no longer enough. You know, somehow we've got to support this. You know, we've got to support this effort towards positive change. You know? We've got to support the trees and the animals and the other inhabitants of this world. You know. I think fundamentally, unless we learn to love the world, unless we give the world what capitalism has done to the world, isn't it? Is to render it dead, as it were, psychically dead. Nothing but human beings have psyche. Of course, this is absolutely ridiculous. We know animals have psyche. I personally believe trees. I personally believe all life has got psyche. You know? This calling of the earth goddess to witness was a witness of the psychic aliveness of life itself. You know? It's testified to the Buddha because the Buddha had acted over many lifetimes compassionately within the world, had supported the world. It's time for us to support the world, isn't it? And I think the only way this is going to happen, because I do think it's too overwhelming for us individually, we have to make community. In Triratna, we've already got quite a well-established community. We've got centres, we've got people meeting and meditating together, practicing together. Of course, this offers the most fantastic base for civil action, for us to get involved and support those other people that are involved in civil action in whatever way your local centre can do. You can do, yeah. I think that's all I've got to say, really. Maybe I'll end this. And here's a poem by Robertson Jeffers, written in the 1950s. This is Carmel Point. The extraordinary patience of things. This beautiful place defaced by a crop of suburban houses. How beautiful when we first beheld it. Unbroken field of poppy and lupin, walled with clean cliffs. No intrusion but 2 or 3 horses pasturing, or a few milked cows scratching their flanks against the outcrop rockhead. Now the spoilers have come. Does it care? Not faintly. It has all time. It knows that people are a tide that will rise and then ebb, and all their works dissolve. Meanwhile, pristine beauty lives on in the very grain of the granite, safe as the oceans that climb our cliffs. As for us, we must uncenter our minds from ourselves, unhumanize our views a little, and become as confident as the rocks in the ocean in which we are made. So thank you, Cameron in particular, for inviting me to take part in this. I feel really moved to be here with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Paramananda. Thank you. That was lovely. And I'm sure you were quite disappointed not to hear the gong, so I think I'll just ring it anyway.
That's wonderful.
As something very familiar to us all.
I was wondering where to go.
And now I'd like to invite Cittapala. Cittapala is a retired psychotherapist, and he's been a Buddhist for over 40 years. And he spent the last 4 years fully involved, first of all, with Extinction Rebellion, subsequently with Insulate Britain. I can tell you that Cittapala was the key person in getting our block team onto the M25 through secret woodland routes and hiding in the woods before we went up and over the barriers. So Cittapala's presence here is very, very significant to me, and I hope to you. And he's now with Just Stop Oil and doing all sorts of things with us. Thank you, Cittapala.
Thank you, Di. That's kind. And I have to say, it's a real privilege to be here with you all this evening. And in particular with Cameron, Paramananda and Cathy, who I each have a great deal of respect for in the different ways that you've engaged with life. 15 minutes isn't very long, so I'm just going to dive in, and I hope, Di, that you'll ring that bell, because I'm bound to run over. So in the time I do have, I'm going to try and answer a question which could be something along the lines of, what does my involvement with Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil have to do with my long-standing commitment to following the Buddhist path? And I have to say just straight away, it's probably going to raise more questions than answers in the next little while. But the really short answer to that question is that I'm not sure I can put it into words. But I do know that it feels to be a moral imperative. And I've known this since I heard Roger Hallam at the end of a talk which he gave in Frome in Somerset, which is where I live, in September 2018, posing a question, which is that he said at the very end of that talk, the real question is, what are you going to do now? And I knew then that I couldn't just stand by and let business unfold as usual. And so far as engaging in civil disobedience, which of course is what Roger was, he's been at it, well, he's been at it a long time, but he's been at it certainly for the last 4 years, encouraging people to do this. As much as it goes against the grain of my conditioning and background and upbringing, I'm certainly not the kind of person who enjoys disrupting other people's lives. I can't really see any other convincing alternatives. And I really wish there were such, because I feel deeply uncomfortable engaging in civil resistance. But that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And just because I have been doing that, I don't think it necessarily means that I've been living by my commitment to the Buddhist path and Buddhist values. And every now and again, I have thought about this question between the connection between the two, especially when I've been sitting in a police cell, which has now happened quite a number of times. It's a rather sort of bizarre deja vu experience, because most police cells seem to be remarkably similar to each other. So you end up back in the same old place. And the question which comes to my mind when I'm there, I'm not sure that this is necessarily the case for many people, but which is, what the hell am I doing here? What is it actually achieved? So that's the kind of doubt that invades my mind when I'm sitting there waiting to be let out, which seems to take longer and longer. It used to be sort of just a few hours, and now it seems to be inevitably about 24 hours when they're actually forced to let me out. A moral imperative. What do I mean by that? Well, just simply that it's the right thing to do. It's the only action that, in holding the values that I do, that I can see that is at all fitting or appropriate, or indeed proportionate to the scale and urgency of the issues that we are faced by. And when I try to make sense of this by connecting it to the Buddhist teaching that I know of, the obvious reference point which comes to mind is the precepts, particularly the 5 precepts that we as Buddhists generally hold in common with whatever kind of denomination of Buddhism that we adhere to. And the first one of that springs to mind is the principle of speaking truthfully, or speaking the truth. And of course, this is Extinction Rebellion's very first demand. And with respect to the climate and ecological emergency, there are facts which I believe that it is incumbent on all of us to have a duty to inform ourselves of, and if at all possible, to tell others if they're willing to listen. And in my own case, if we go back to just over 4 years ago, September 2018, I had a very rude shock when encountering the facts. It's not that I didn't know them before, and a great many people, I think, do know the facts when it boils down to it, or at least some of them, at least. It depends how far you're willing to dig around and find them. But what I find fascinating about facts is that very often there's a great deal of quite charged, there's quite a lot of charge, emotional charge around how we engage with those facts. Whose interpretation, opinion, or evaluation or analysis do we come to trust when we listening to people who are conveying what they say are the facts? I was listening to a talk by Dr. Commodity Gray, again put on by Just Stop Oil a few months ago now, which I really do recommend. It was entitled "The Ethics of Civil Disobedience." And she asked the question, when so many of us know and have known the facts, why are we not collectively doing more to address them? And she comes to the conclusion that the facts, that is the science, is just not enough. And just repeating it again and again and again just hasn't really sufficiently moved people, or enough people, to do anything of any significance. And in brief, her answer to that question she posed is that the facts have to be rooted in and determined by the values that we adhere to and to which we hold dear. So as a way of trying to evoke what I value and hold dear is, I'm just going to paint you a picture of what I often find myself doing these days, which is walking in the beechwoods on the edge of the Longleat estate, which is thankfully only a few miles from where I live. It's a living cathedral of beauty, a space which is lit by the soft light filtering through its leaves, especially when the sun's out. In every direction, there's a kind of gallery of beautiful images and apparently intoxicating smells, to judge by my dog's excitement when he's there too with me. This is where I go to drink in the awe-inspiring aspects of the magical beauty and mystery of nature, of life. It's a space in which is both timeless and constantly moving, but in another way, it's constantly changing as well, especially with the seasonal changes. So this for me represents, or is, a form of meditating. It's reconnecting with what I feel to be most fundamental in being alive. And the natural emotional resonance of being alive is to love being alive, and to love those that we live with, and to cherish and care for, and to want for those to thrive. And when we receive that support, to feel connected and mutually supported. And with all of that, it's entirely natural to wish to protect the life around us. And so obviously killing, or anything that remotely heads in that direction, is the antithesis of this. It negates our common humanity, our bond and relatedness to life. And this reminds me of a phrase used by my teacher, Sangharakshita, when he was speaking of the first precept, abstaining from killing living beings. And he explained that it was wrong to do this because life is the greatest good. When we stop to really think about this, it's the greatest good because we, in common with all life, we wish to continue to live. We all, anything that's alive, struggles to avoid dying. And it's a bond that we share with anything that is alive, that's living. And in a sense, life is that huge ultimate mystery, which is impossible for any of us to really get a handle on. And as I said, it's entirely natural to want to do something to protect that which we love and care for if it's under threat. And I just wanted to, just as an aside, I mean, compassionate action is based in metta, as probably most of you know, but also in this word care, which is a translation that Stephen Batchelor uses to translate the word apramada, which is one of the last words of the Buddha. Often translated with mindfulness, strive on, but in Batchelor's translations is with care, strive on. So it would seem quite incumbent upon us as Buddhists to want to do whatever we can to try and protect the fact that our planet, our globe, our whole kind of life support system is under extreme threat. But at the same time, if we engage in civil disobedience, which is inevitably, unfortunately, something that involves disrupting other people's lives, it seems to automatically bring us into conflict with a commitment to the second precept, which is that of abstaining from taking the not given. In being civilly disruptive, very often we're taking from people's lives their time, their energy, their opportunity, their freedom to go about doing whatever they want to do. And so this is something that I've felt quite keenly, particularly when I've been sitting on the road, having somebody screaming at me saying, what are you doing, what you're doing? Why don't you go and do this outside Downing Street, or whatever version of that particular kind of question and accusation that they come up with. It's this conflict between wanting to act in a way to protect life, to save life. And it's that dilemma with actually feeling that in some way or other I'm contravening the precepts by taking something away without their permission. And this dilemma isn't something that I have an answer to offer you with, but if we think about it in other sorts of situations, it seems to evaporate when we consider stopping a child walking into a busy road and endangering its life by doing so. We enact quite forcibly to stop that child going about it. And what about the example of taking up arms to protect life, as seems to be clearly the case currently in Ukraine? Would we do that if we were forced to protect life? So it kind of raises this whole really important question, which is Paramananda came up with, which is compassionate action. What exactly do we mean by that? Well, one of the things that I wanted to share with you was that whilst this isn't particularly a Buddhist source, Thoreau declared that if a government was acting in an unjust way, then the just thing to do was to end up, as he put it, the true place for a just man is in prison. And this was based to some extent, I believe, on a couple of political theorists. One was Thomas Hobbes, and the other one was John Locke. And in both cases, they point to the social contract, which is basically an understanding that we give as a populace, as a group of people, to a government to in the first instance protect us. And if they're not doing that, then these two particular thinkers said that it's our duty and our responsibility to rebel. Now, non-violent civil disobedience holds up this principle of non-violence, so it's very much in accord with Buddhist teaching, and it seems to be absolutely the opposite of what revolution very often seems to descend into, which is that of some kind of violence or aggression. And even if it doesn't go that far, I believe non-violent civil disobedience is very much about not creating enemies, or othering is another way of putting it, other people. So somehow or other, it's about trying to reach out and appeal to people's conscience and better selves. And this is an extremely difficult place, I think, an awkward place for us as Buddhists to be in, because, as I've said, an integral part of civil disobedience is through disruption. And it's really fundamentally, it comes down to a sort of strike logic. We by preventing normal life being able to kind of unfold in its own sort of ordinary way, we're compelling or forcing a group of people, in particular the government, or maybe the pillars of power, as it's sometimes called, to change course. And the attempt is to try and raise, a significant number of us to do this. Apparently, the social science suggests that we don't need that many. We only need a small percentage of the population to be able to bring about a rethink and a change of policy. Well, a lot of what's of all of that is quite sort of, I suppose, how can I put it? Sort of, it's working against something and trying to push something into happening. But very often it seems, I think, which is one of the powers of images and stories, is a question of moving people through something that they want to create or move towards. So just finally, just to finish up with you, I wanted to suggest that another way of reading the Noble Eightfold Path has been suggested by Stephen Batchelor, in which he puts forward the notion that in rereading that teaching, we can think of it more as a way of creating a new society. So this comes from one of the parables that the Buddha talks about in relation to that of finding a lost city, which is then rebuilt. And this is used as a way of illustrating the different stages of the Eightfold Path. So this is about trying to show people that actually the world that we're trying to save is one in which we can create something which is essentially much more human, much more fitting for human society to live in, one which isn't constrained by a sort of addictiveness to consumerism, one in which indeed is a real and genuine embodiment of Sangha in its full kind of breadth and depth. So thank you. It's been good to have the opportunity to try and talk this stuff through with you, and I hope you'll be joining us.
Thank you, Cittapala. Thank you very much. And thank you especially for your emphasis on non-violence, which will enable me, that reminder, to speak a little differently about the pathways to action. And now I'd like to invite Cathy Eastburn to speak. Cathy is a musician and a mother, and she's been involved in the front lines, blocking motorways with Insulate Britain particularly, and subsequently doing stuff behind the scenes, and in particular helping to create our resilience building offerings, which is going to be part of what Cathy speaks about. Thanks, Cathy.
Thanks, Di. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you all. And yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit about our resilience building offerings and how they draw upon the work of Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, which has already been mentioned this evening. But I just want to start with a short quote from a really good book called The Entangled Activist by Anthea Lawson. And if you haven't already come across it, I highly recommend it, except it's printed in really tiny, faint font, so I can hardly read it, but here goes. So she's quoting, Anthea Lawson is quoting an activist that she spoke to, who said to her, "We need to get more people off their yoga mats and into lock-ons, and more people out of lock-ons and onto yoga mats." And if you don't know what a lock-on is, it's one of the tubes that we sometimes take out on actions to kind of lock ourselves to each other inside, and then it's really, really hard for the police to get us off the road and arrest us. So I'm just going to read it again. I think this time I'm going to replace yoga mats with cushions. So this activist said, "We need to get more people off their cushions and into lock-ons, and more people out of lock-ons and onto cushions." And what some of us have been trying to do over the last sort of year and a half, during Insulate Britain, and in fact leading up to Insulate Britain, and more recently with Just Stop Oil, is to really have a good balance between being in lock-ons and being on cushions or on yoga mats. So kind of balancing what I call the inner work and the outer work. And the work that reconnects, Joanna Macy's body of work, has been incredibly important in helping us do that. And I was going to give you a kind of really dry presentation about Joanna Macy's work and how we incorporate that into our resilience building offerings. But I've decided instead to just give you tell you a short story, really, which is a kind of version of my story. So the first thing to say is I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm a really massive fan of Buddhism and Buddhist practices and wisdom. I'm also not an activist. I certainly don't consider myself to be an activist. I don't really use that word. I do think of myself as a mother. I am a mother of 2 daughters. I'm a musician by profession. I'm very fortunate in many, many ways. And I think when I think about who I am at essence, I'm a human being really trying to live a full life at this incredibly challenging but amazing time. And sort of a little potted history. I was a very law-abiding and sort of environmentally concerned child, teenager, and adult until a few years ago. And I really thought I was sort of doing my bit. I was leading a kind of green lifestyle and doing lots of what I thought to be good and important things, like writing to my MP about stuff and going on marches and giving money to worthy green organisations, and I even worked for an environmental campaigning group for a time. And then about 10 years ago, it gradually started dawning on me that far from things improving, all I could see was that we were on a trajectory towards climate collapse and the sort of total destruction of the natural world. And I remember when Extinction Rebellion came on the scene in 2018, I felt a huge sense of relief, and I got involved straight away by, first of all, giving them money, and then I was involved as a legal observer for a while. And then in 2019, a very good friend of mine who's actually on this call, Mark Ovland, who is a Buddhist, he was also involved with Extinction Rebellion, and he got me involved with my first arrestable action, and together we and some other people glued ourselves to the Hotel Intercontinental in London, which was hosting International Petroleum Week. That was my first time I got arrested, and subsequently I got involved in other things. So in April 2019, Mark, again, myself again, and somebody else, we stood on a DLR train at Canary Wharf with a banner that said climate emergency. And that resulted in us being sent to prison for a week. And I was involved in other actions after that. And in fact, I was just looking at the date today, 3rd of October. This time, 3rd of October, 3 years ago, at this very time, Mark, myself, and a few other people were in Islington police station in the cells, because that day we went to the Treasury with a fire engine and sprayed fake blood over the front of the Treasury to highlight the Treasury's continued funding of new fossil fuel projects around the world. So yeah, since then I've been involved with Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil. I, like Rob and like many others, do not like being disruptive. It makes me very uncomfortable. I find it very difficult, but I see it as absolutely necessary at this time to do these things. I've been arrested, I can't even remember how many times. I think it might be 14 or 15. I've been to prison twice now. And I've been involved in quite a few trials, both magistrates' court trials and Crown Court trials. And I continue to do things on the sort of, as we call it, front line. I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but and I just want to say that although it is quite difficult and discomforting sometimes doing these things, it's also an incredibly amazing experience, going out and doing these things with a community of people and acting very strongly grounded in a sense of love, not just for each other, but for everybody, including those that we frame as our opponents, and with all living beings. It's a really powerful and wonderful feeling. And there is sometimes a sense of real magic and even a kind of joy in doing these things. I think crucial for me anyway, in being able to sort of carry on stepping up and being involved, is this kind of inner work. So the balance of the inner work and the outer work, and really crucial to that has been Joanna Macy's work that reconnects. I see I've only got 1 minute left. So I just want to finish off by saying a little bit about the inner work within Just Stop Oil community. So a team of us, the Resilience to Resist team, run a whole series of regular offerings, mostly on Zoom, but also in real life sometimes. And the main sort of centerpiece of those offerings is a session that we call Building Trust and Courage, which many people within the Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil community have attended either once or twice, or in some cases every week. And these sessions are based on Joanna Macy's work that reconnects Spiral. And if you're not familiar with her work, you can just go to her website, workthatreconnects.com, which has lots of free, brilliant resources on it. But essentially, her spiral means that we start grounded in gratitude. We then move on to honouring our pain for the world. So really, as Paramananda was saying, acknowledging those very difficult feelings of grief, anger, and so on, and working through them, recognising that they're there because of our love for the world. And then we look at things with new eyes. So that enables us to start to envision a life-sustaining future, and then we go forth into our action. We offer other things as well for people within the community, such as mindfulness meditations, which are offered by very experienced meditation leaders, and other offerings as well. So I'm just going to finish by saying I really hope that in the future, perhaps more Buddhists will step up and engage in civil resistance as part of the Just Stop Oil community, because I think we could really do with more input from you in helping to hold these spaces and helping ensure that we keep the balance right between the inner work and the kind of outward focused actions. So I just want to really encourage you to get involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you. That's just reminded me that after I went to the Insulate Britain talk, I thought, Insulate Britain, that's weird. It sounds like we're cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world. And I was also a bit doubtful about the red, white and blue colourways, not thinking that being a Buddhist and a nationalist are very comfortable partners. And then I actually went along to a Building Trust and Courage session, just happened to go along to it. And I suddenly recognised that I could put all of that aside, because the people who were present, both as participants and as facilitators, it felt really like, that phrase, I'd found my tribe. It really felt important to me. And I hope that the possibility feels important to you.